We have a Prospectus Agent that can take a 150-page prospectus and it can generate a 1,000-field fund record within our system, and it can do it in 3 minutes with 95 to 98% accuracy.
Welcome to the Fund AI Pod. My next guest is a titan of the funds industry, having spent 37 years at Northern Trust in roles such as President of Global Fund Services. He is now the Chairman of FINBOURNE. Toby Glaysher, welcome to the pod.
Thank you for having me.
So I briefly touched on your career there, but why don't you walk us through where you started, some of the key roles that you had, the segment you played in, and what that sort of taught you?
Sure. Gosh. And thanks for the intro. I'm not sure Titan's appropriate, but it sounds better than veteran. I started in this industry back in 1987, before we had even personal computers, let alone Swift or anything like that. So I've seen significant changes over those years and amazing growth in the industry. Like most people in global custody, I got there by accident. I don't think anybody grows up saying, when I finish university, I want to be a global custodian, or at least I've never heard it. But it's a great industry, to be honest. We're protecting and enabling the savings and retirement and so on of the majority of the world. So it certainly has a useful social purpose. And it's gone through bouts of significant growth and significant change. I think the biggest change I've seen to date was probably extending Swift to the asset managers. Was the step change in automation that I've seen. But I think all of that could pale in comparison with what is yet to come, with the changes that are coming through data and digital transformation generally, but specifically the enablement of AI that will bring.
So your current role is now Chairman at FINBOURNE. So for the audience that hasn't come across FINBOURNE, who are they, what do they do, and who are their clients?
So FINBOURNE is an end-to-end asset management and servicing platform. Its product set includes portfolio management, order management, investment book of record, accounting book of record, custody, performance, enterprise data management, shareholder registration, and transfer agency. So it is genuinely an end-to-end platform. It is different from the competition in that it is a truly modern platform. It is absolutely a data-led, API-first, cloud-native, event-driven, and 100% in the public cloud, fully containerized, etc., all the features that you would want to see. And I think importantly, it is also bitemporal, and that is really a game changer in terms of our ability to do that, rather to support that end-to-end asset management, asset servicing process, and therefore to really dramatically reduce the number of applications that a provider needs, dramatically reduce the connectivity and end-to-end points between data to get to a single source of truth around data, which is the single biggest way of making yourself more productive, and to get that data organized in a way that makes it AI ready.
Very interesting. And I haven't come across bitemporal before. What does that actually mean in reality for the data?
Yeah. So bitemporal is the thing that enables us to take the same data and have a different view of it, or multiple different views of it. So traditionally, if, for example, you were maintaining an investment book of record and an accounting book of record, you would need two different ledgers to do that on. Okay. And you would be taking on a lot more maintenance, and actually probably you would have two different applications altogether, and all the onerous overhead and risk and reconciliation that goes with that. Because we are bitemporal, we're able to take one transaction and represent it multiple times in different views of that data, which means we only have to hold that transaction once, and we can create multiple views of that data.
So you do away with the need for a snap versus live. You, in effect, can rewind or wind forward looking at the date stamp of that transaction. Would that be fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
And a good example is if you had a NAV that you did as of November, and then there was a trade that you missed for 30th of November and you booked in December, you can kind of slice and dice that depending on what view you want to have.
Yeah. Very good example is exactly that. And unless that late transaction actually caused a material error, you would leave the NAV well alone, but you would absolutely want to adjust your investment book of record and your performance book of record to account for it.
Fantastic. Now, you came from an organization that's been around a long time, so they have legacy tech. They would have came from mainframes and servers and moved into FINBOURNE that was cloud native API first, as you said. What does that more modern tech stack allow you to do, and what benefits does it have in terms of velocity of product development and capabilities?
Sure. I would say it's not just the tech stack, but I'll start with the tech stack itself. Look, the legacy applications that the entire industry is carrying, and I certainly wouldn't want to single out my previous employer as being any materially different from its peer group, is really the biggest impediment to change within those organizations. You've got these old mainframe applications, which are, if not end of life, they're very close to end of life. They've been coded in COBOL and RPG3 and the like. And there's literally no one left who knows how to do that anymore, let alone anyone who remembers why they did it a certain way the first time round. And so those are applications that become extraordinarily difficult to change. And you're always very nervous about changing them, even if you can figure out the right path forward to do so, because of the fragility that goes with that. So it's not just the speed of change that's holding you back. It's not just the lack of coders that know the language that's holding you back. You have to be very sensitive around the resiliency risk that goes with those platforms as well. And so for all of those reasons, you just have to get off of those platforms. And it is the sheer size and scale of the client base, the investors, the data that is on those old platforms that is the single biggest impediment to getting onto the new platforms.
And with your platform, you are integrating data from external as well as what you maintain internal. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have a data virtualization capability that enables us to quite easily take data from other systems and to ingest that.
And when it comes to AI, which we're going to touch on, a key ingredient is clean, audible, structured data. What is your data governance and how do you ensure that the data is kept clean, especially as you integrate changes from reconciliation and other systems and data inputs?
Yeah. And that is one of the, our core platform, Lucid, one of the great advantages of that platform as an enterprise data mart is the fact that it has quality control around the data that it's taking in. So we're making sure that that data is accurate. We're not just putting it out there without those quality controls. It's also been spec'd to the highest standard around lineage and taxonomy and traceability of that data. So completely up there with the highest standards, which gives you the traceability that you need to be. It gives you traceability that's actually much better than manual and human-generated traceability, if you like. So we're able to take a transaction and show you exactly the process that it went through to get there.
And how does that lead to more automation or better insights into the data? What does that deliver to the clients?
Well, I think traceability and lineage and so on is becoming really table stakes just from a regulatory standpoint, if nothing else. But I think the key part it plays in enabling the innovation is when you're starting to combine that with AI, it becomes really much more important. It becomes the thing that enables you to start using AI to execute functions rather than just retrieve data. You can't possibly, in a regulated financial world, start executing actions via AI unless you have permissioning, traceability, and auditability.
So touching then on the AI, let's double click into that. I noticed that FINBOURNE had a press release about 5 months ago around a partnership with Anthropic and Claude. Are you able to walk us through how that works, what the role of each company does in terms of how they combine the data with Anthropic's models?
Yeah, and look, most companies that are serious about AI are going to have a partnership with an LLM provider. We selected Claude for a number of reasons, but it is really the most, for us, to put it at a kind of basic level, it's the most tech friendly of the LLMs. And certainly when it comes to things like code and model generation and testing, we think it has some clear advantages over the other LLMs. But if we're honest, really any of the leading LLMs are pretty extraordinary, and the gaps between them are not terribly big.
And I think one of the interesting things that I saw with it is it enables you to use natural language to query the data. So tell me about my nav, why did it drop? But it leverages FINBOURNE's, your controls, your permissioning, your structure. Is that an accurate description?
So, and look, it doesn't necessarily need to be Claude. It just so happens that it was Anthropic who developed the Model Context Protocol, or MCP, which has now come to be adopted across the LLM landscape as the standard for getting LLMs to interact with commands, code, APIs, and so on. And it is precisely through that combination of pairing the NLP capabilities of an LLM with our APIs via the MCP servers that we've developed using that protocol that enable us to do executable functions that are permission, traceable, auditable. Now, that's an awful lot of 3-letter acronyms to try and keep track of. But what we're actually saying is you take a large language model, and it has these extraordinary language capabilities. Okay, you put it through an MCP server, and essentially what you're doing is that's how you control the access and context that you put around the function that you've asked that large language model to perform, and helps direct it to the right command on the other side. In our case, that will be an API. Okay, and so, for example, to put it in practical terms, we have a Prospectus Agent that can take a 150-page prospectus with 15 share classes and multiple sub-funds and so on, and it can generate a 1,000-field fund record within our system, and it can do it in 3 minutes with 95 to 98% accuracy. What's actually happening there is we're using the LLM to scan through and parse the prospectus language. It then goes to the MCP, which there's a specific MCP server for setting up a fund. It then calls the right API within our system, within our platform, which then says, okay, have you got permission to set up a fund? Have you got permission to be in this data area? And when it's passed those tests, it then starts to match up the language in the prospectus with the fields that the API requires filling to set up that fund. And it's able to do so with a predicted level of accuracy. And so if it's 100% certain, okay, it says, I need to put a fund name in here. I need to put an ISIN in here. It'll be 100% certain that it has found the ISIN number within the prospectus and it's found the fund name within the prospectus. But when it starts to get into other areas, it may have less certainty, and then it will flag where it has less certainty so that we can direct those things for human review.
So you have human in the loop still, and then you would obviously have an audit trail on its confidence level on each of those predictions as well.
Correct. Actually, we have a better audit trail than you would have if you had humans setting up that fund, because what happens more generally today is the fund launch or the transition team within operations will get given this prospectus and they will start working on putting that fund together. They do not note, as they fill in each field on the fund file, exactly where they got it from.
You've got more metadata.
Yeah. But now I can say, when you set up that fund, because I had an error or a complication down the track, show me where that field came from, and it will show you precisely where that field came from.
Fantastic. Great example. And that's really what I love to share on this podcast is real life examples of AI and agents in the real world. And tell me, do you know, did FINBOURNE start with experimenting with AI in-house, with looking at internal efficiencies, testing out, getting familiar with it? Or did they jump straight into client-driven solutions and automation?
Oh, no, we've been working on this for some time and we've experimented with it. We thought we were going to have to create our own model and do our own training. And then along came the MCP, the Model Context Protocol, and that's really been the game changer that pushed us in a different direction and has enabled us to really accelerate our development of agentic AI. And that's the principal way in which we're using AI in order to deliver functionality and efficiency for our clients. But there is another way in which we're using AI, which is for our own benefit as a coder, as an engineer, in terms of code generation. And that is having a significant and really, it's a very impactful thing for us, and it really turbocharges our best developers to be able to be the proverbial 10x.
And that's definitely what we see in the industry is coding is seeing the biggest benefits. You mentioned agents, and 2025 is the year of the agents, and I think we'll see agentic workflows be a common theme in 2026. Would you say that in the near term, the greater use cases is more in the middle and back office because that's repeatable workflows or repeatable steps and therefore the easiest agentic solutions? Or are you seeing more use cases in the front office, investment, decision-making side of the process?
So we feel quite strongly that the better use cases at this point in the evolution are in the middle and back office, because it's much easier to achieve significant efficiency at scale, and to do so in a way that reduces risk and is not perceived to increase risk. And so the number one obstacle when you get to using AI is historically someone in your organization, and often many, many people in your organization, is saying it's too risky to use it. And you end up putting all sorts of guardrails around it and really destroying the efficiency case in the first place. And so we do think there are really good use cases in the middle and back office where you can deploy agentic AI to be, frankly, replacing operations teams and doing so in a way that is more accurate and less risky and more timely than the existing processes. And I think that will lead to greater organizational familiarity and acceptance around it, which will then enable moving up the value chain into the front office. Although, interestingly, one of the areas where we think the agent that we've developed will have a really big impact is in terms of rebalancing.
Walk us through that.
So where you've got a strategic asset allocation or a target asset allocation, you want to rebalance that portfolio because you had changes in valuations or flows and so on. That is, for complex portfolios, a notoriously difficult and time-consuming thing that involves taking data out of multiple systems, putting it into spreadsheets, running an algo over it to do the calculations, and then you've got to put it back into your order management system, generate the orders, and so on. We can do all of that within our rebalancing agent, and that enables you to do this at scale and very quickly and on an unlimited frequency.
Wow, that's a great case. Now, you've spoken about a prospectus agent, rebalancing agent. What would be some other use cases that you've built in terms of agents that are delivering value for your clients?
Reconciliation agent is one that we have in production that's making a big impact for the first client that's gone live with it. It's not the biggest client, but they do have about 2,500 accounts across about 25 custodians. They're using the reconciliation agent, and their recs are basically done and dusted every morning across those 25 custodians in well under an hour with just the one employee.
And it's interesting because often I bucket AI into kind of the first pillar, which would be productivity and efficiency, which this one would fall into. And then ideally that frees up capacity to look at insights and value creation. So that rec agent delivers efficiency. Do you envision a world then where it can start to give you that insights and look at the recs and say, hey, you are getting 20% of your breaks from this prime broker based on commissions. You need to update your commission table in your OMS, PMS. Is that
Absolutely.
where the world of AI is going? Is it there yet, or is that?
Yeah, but you've got to teach it to do that. All right. And so there has to be a learning process. So the route to that for us is what we do with the exceptions that get generated is they go into a structured database. And then we have a table of resolution codes so that when you accept that exception or you escalate it for further action, you have to explain your actions in a way that is repeatable so that we can train the AI to learn from that and predict the future exceptions and supply answers through its own learning.
If you're enjoying this podcast format and content, please visit my podcast website, www.thefundaipod.com. There, you can watch past episodes, submit a guest nomination form, and explore multiple ways to work with me. If your firm needs guidance with AI, you should contact my AI and automation consulting firm, Zentia. Zentia can help identify top AI use cases, build or co-build agentic solutions, train your staff, and implement a governance and oversight program. Visit www.zentia.io. That's zentia.io. What has the client engagement and adoption been around these tools? Is it something they need to be educated on, the benefits and the risks, etc.? Or is it something that your clients are coming to you and asking for because they're looking for these tools and efficiencies as well?
The biggest obstacle for us, obstacles I'd say, in terms of getting agentic AI adoption are, yes, there's an education process that we have to go through, and we would typically have to go through, the head of AI at our client, and we take them through that in the risk department and so on, and get them comfortable with this and give them the tools that they can monitor it, oversee it, and look at, audit it, trace it, and so on. It's not so much the clients that are coming to us and demanding it. In fact, some of them are quite surprised at what can be done on a permission traceable basis. In many cases, they've had organizational disappointment where they've spun up AI projects and POCs and the like and invested money and gotten very little to show for it, to be blunt. And so it's more likely than not to come as a pleasant surprise that they can do this in a safe and controlled way that has a meaningful impact. The second thing, and this is the biggest obstacle to adoption, is to the point about all of the legacy applications that they're running today. You can select FINBOURNE as a platform and you get these capabilities with it, but you have to get your funds migrated onto that platform. And it's the migration from the legacy and strangling that legacy application ecosystem that is actually the hardest bit.
That was definitely going to be one of my questions, is how do you migrate from a legacy tech platform that also may be missing some of the core information you need onto FINBOURNE? What does that process look like? And then is there an enrichment process that needs to go through it, or you just take what is available from the legacy?
So there are three core elements to an integration and implementation and migration, which are, is there any functional build that is required to meet those requirements? We've built out the vast majority of the platform now, so that tends to be less and less of an issue. Secondly, it's around the integrations, which goes to the heart of what you're saying. So we have to integrate to old platforms, both in order to get the data that we need to get it set up. And to your point around, if I can't get all my data from that accounting system, for example, it's unlikely to, say, have the OTC terms and conditions in it. It's probably got a stub record around the OTC, for example. I have to then integrate to the OTC platform that contains the T's and C's. And that is the path that we go down. So rather than replicating incomplete information, our goal is always, we'll just build another integration. Our goal is to get all of the data that you need into a single source. So that was the second kind of element to the implementation. And the third is the configuration of our system. And again, that's becoming easier and easier because we've got a standard set of configurations across many different personas that we're able to use as a starting point now.
Looking forward, where do you see AI in the investment management process? What could it possibly deliver in the future, and what capabilities are there to be built?
So we've talked a lot about the sort of middle office, back office operational things, and I think that's been pretty well accepted now, although people struggle to actually execute on that sometimes. When we look at asset management and wealth management, what does that leave? Well, the two other things it leaves are the investor experience and the distributive side of the house, and then the actual creation of investment performance and the manufacturing side of the house. From a distribution and investor experience point of view, I think the change is not far behind, and I think it will be in line with the changes that we're all going to experience generally in our digital lives, which is portals will disappear altogether. It will be a rare thing when you actually run a report, because you will just ask a question and get the answer to that question. Certainly, it's pretty rare for me to go and try and do some research using a portal these days. I'm going to go to ChatGPT or Claude or whatever it is, and I'm going to ask the question. And so the ability to say, oh, I want to know what my exposure to China is. Right. Now, can you exclude Hong Kong from that? Or can you put Hong Kong into that, for example? Right. Can you show me that in a graphical form? What happens if X? And that's really the segue into the manufacturing changes that we see coming as well. So, you think about some of these large existing portfolio order management systems today and the risk modeling that they do, I see a future in which that is somewhat redundant, because you'll be able to say to your agentic assistant, if the sterling interest rate does X and the dollar sterling, the cable rate goes to Y, what will be the effect on my portfolio? And it'll just go and calculate that instantly. And so I think it will profoundly change the way that portfolios get managed. I think it's already affecting the research that goes into underlying companies, but I think the what if scenarios that you'll be able to do and the flexibility around that will be considerable.
Very powerful, for sure. And just going back to agents, do you envision effectively an agent for every function? A subscription agent, a capital call agent, a payments agent, and then maybe a orchestration agent sitting over the top, and that every function would have its own agent eventually?
I do, pretty much. And then what you'll get is super agents. And I've just made that up on the spot, by the way. But what we're working on right now is we have a reconciliation agent, we have a pricing agent. We will be building a fee calculation agent, an expense agent, and so on. And if you think about what, say, a fund accountant or a fund accounting function does to get to a final NAV, the first thing they do is they look at their reconciliations and they look for material differences that they need to investigate. And then they run pricing checks on the stock prices that have come in to the underlying NAV. And then they have to check for share class divergence or whatever it is. And so what we will create is these overall agents that are taking the underlying agents, putting an orchestration layer of workflow around them that enables us to create a package of agents that goes through various gates. And if it passes all of those gates, send the NAV out. And you've got yourself a fund accounting agent. The fund accounting agent is not an agent in and of itself. It's an orchestration of all the underlying agents that make up those tasks.
Double clicking into that, just because we both worked in fund admin for a long time. Do you envision a live NAV for traditional funds eventually? Is there anything stopping that? Like an ETF, for example, but on the traditional side.
I think those kind of changes are driven by demand rather than supply. What I'd say is the enabling capability will be there. And so it will be whether there is sufficient demand or enough of a use case to warrant doing it, because it won't be a technology or a cost obstacle anymore.
Fair. And then just stepping back a bit, you spoke about the efficiencies that these agents will drive. If we look at the industry, and from your experience managing large organizations, there's a debate around the job destruction from the efficiencies of this. But at the same time, it creates new roles. It frees up capacity to either take on more clients or move up the chain into more value-added tasks. I guess my question is, how do you see this impacting the industry? Is it going to be more the jobs reductions, or is it going to be freeing up the capacity to either win more business or move up the chain in terms of value functions?
Yeah. Look, I understand the concern around people and jobs, and I think it's perfectly natural. One of the benefits of being a little longer in the tooth and having seen transformational change in different guises over the course of my career, I'm less worried about that, certainly in the medium term. There will undoubtedly be some short-term disruption in that space. But throughout history, we have consistently innovated and automated, starting with, say, the Industrial Revolution, for example. And as I say, in our industry, we've gone from tested telex and fax to Swift to instant, you name it. And there are more people employed in our industry today than there were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. The difference is they're handling many more transactions and many more funds and much more volume and scale. And so I think it will lead to different types of job. And when I think about that, the other thing I'd say is some of these jobs are not jobs that are easy to recruit for anymore. And I say this in my prior role. I had 7,000 people working for me, 6,000 of them doing investment operations in various guises. And it was getting harder and harder to recruit for some of those roles. They were not jobs that young people want to go into. These were not seen as desirable careers. And so the risk of carrying on in that way is a different type of risk. So look, there'll undoubtedly be some disruption, and that's just the nature of creative destruction. I don't believe longer term that this leads to mass unemployment or worse off economies. I think this will lead to tremendous economic growth.
And a good example there is farming in the US in the 1900s was 50% of the economy. It's 1% now, but those people are still working. There's new jobs created.
100%. Or where you come from in Australia, all of the mining's done by autonomous vehicles now. Those were not safe or great jobs before.
And then one more question on when you're looking at building an agent. What goes into the business case in terms of measuring its success, its ROI? Is it the efficiency it delivers, the risk reduction, obviously client adoption and therefore revenue, hopefully attached to it? But what goes into A, prioritizing what you're going to focus on building next, and then B, the success of that deployment of the solution?
Yeah, and I'd love to tell you that we have this really disciplined process where we evaluate the ROI and the risk reduction. And right now we're in the foothills of this thing, and really we're just building out as fast as we can whatever our clients are asking us to do.
Working in an agile method.
Much better put.
Excellent, Toby. This has been super educational, super insightful. If people want to learn more about FINBOURNE, where do they go in terms of websites and LinkedIn?
Both. Yep. So we're very active on LinkedIn, and there's extraordinary amount of data available through the portal in terms of, we're very transparent about what's available in our APIs and our platforms and so on and so forth. And for those people that are clients or industry consultants and so on, we are now releasing AI sandboxes and lucid sandboxes, and we've got a whole set of toolkits coming out.
Excellent. And what is the website for FINBOURNE?
FINBOURNE.com.
Very simple. And tell me, there's a lot of change in the funds industry, technology, data. How do you stay current on it?
Well, for me, it's not a chore because I kind of enjoy it. My inner geek, that's what I would choose to do with my time. Anyway, and there is an inordinate amount of material available. I'm not just saying this to be polite because I'm sat on your podcast, but I actually find podcasts are a terrific way of keeping abreast of things, and a really good way of using downtime in the car or on the train and so on.
Excellent. Well, Toby, I appreciate your time today. Thanks for coming on the pod.
Good to see you, mate.